Well, thanks to a lot of work with and by the community over the years and some phenomenal pulling together of ideas on the part of our city staff, I think it'll be pretty easy to craft a motion tonight, and I'll do that in a moment. But first, there were a couple of issues that came up in the testimony that I didn't address. One had been the validity of that air pollution study taken when the airport was closed for a few days, and I got to remedy that misstatement by talking to Ms. Ernst. I'm glad I got to do that. Another issue that came up a few times was that there are only a few vocal opponents, some people say, to the airport, who are homeowners who live nearby and are looking at their home values. And I just want to point out that while, yes, there are many people in Sunset Park and Ocean Park concerned about this issue, that before us tonight we have letters of support from the Pico Neighborhood Association, which is on the other side of Pico Boulevard, and much of it is actually north of the freeway. We also have letters of support from Northeast Neighbors and the Wilmot Neighborhood Group, both of which are north of Wilshire. So there are residents throughout this city concerned about what the airport operations as currently configured mean to our city, to our sustainability, to our environment, to the safety of our citizens, and to the children who go to our public schools. So this is not a limited issue, and if it was, we wouldn't be here all night as we have been working on this. The other thing I wanted to address was the I'll call it a canard, that if the council wants to close the airport, the only possible reason is to approve huge development on that site. I think former Mayor Feinstein sussed out the politics of that pretty well. Nobody would last here on the dais if they planned to do that. I also thought it was curious that one of the airport proponents said that Chicago shut down Meigs Field. And now there's wind whistling through the brush, nothing happening there. I guess there's no development pressure in Chicago. Part of my motion will make clear that my intent, and I hope the whole council's, is that we are looking only at low impact, low intensity use on this site. Frankly, it's not an appropriate site for the kind of development that might be appropriate in other parts of our city or the region. There's no mass transit anywhere near this site. So I think that argues for it, but let me try and put together a motion based on the staff recommendation. I think the staff recommendation here really lays out the direction we can take, but I would like to clarify and augment a little bit before I ask for a second, so we all know we're talking about the same thing. The staff wants us to, well, part of the problem here is we have a written staff report, and then we had an oral staff report, and then we have the slide up on the screen. But in the written staff report, it said to continue to pursue city control of the use of its airport land. Let me say that again. It's its airport land. It's our land. It's not the FAA's land. One of the claims, which I believe is specious, that the FAA is making is that because some grant money changed hands, that we are obligated in some way till 2023. And so I would like to add to the staff recommendation, or maybe it's just a clarification, that we are more than willing to pay the money back to free that land. And we're prepared to write that check, and that'll be part of my motion. I understand the FAA has never accepted such a check, but that's their problem. Actually, if somebody offered me a check for that much money, but that's another story. So I'd like to make sure that we're making it clear that we are willing to pay the fee to free the land. The second part of the motion has to do with the future use of the airport land. And when we adopted the current land use and circulation element, there were a few parts of town we left out deliberately, and the airport was one of them. And with the other parts of town that we had left out, we knew what we wanted, and so we have since begun the process of what's called a specific plan. We don't know quite what we want yet for the airport, so we can't really do a specific plan, and there is no term of art in planning as an unspecific plan. So I think what I'll call it is a concept plan. And this is part of the staff recommendation, that we now begin to develop an airport concept plan based on low intensity use for the reasons that I've given and for others. And that we, in doing that concept plan, take into account that the quitclaim parcel may fall uncontested into our hands in 2015. So let's make some plans for that as a concept plan. Let's move forward with that. And then the other part of this would be what to do about the leases. And you may have heard, if you were here for this entire meeting, that at the beginning of the meeting, the staff revised the original staff recommendation and is suggesting instead that we enter into 3-year leases with annual options at the city's discretion. But I think what's key as we go and do that is that we have leasing guidelines that make sense for the airport. And right now, we don't. It's a hodgepodge. So I think we need to be consistent, and we need to direct our staff as part of moving the staff recommendation to come up with leasing guidelines that are sensitive to the environment, to the need for environmental remediation. For instance, if you're digging a hole and you're digging a hole and you don't want to be in a hole, the first thing you do is put down the shovel. So in this case, if there are things happening at the airport that are going to require ever greater environmental remediation in the future at greater cost, the first thing we should do in the leasing guidelines is say you can't be doing those things anymore. Those would be my clarifications and augmentations of the staff recommendation, which I will thereby move. Actually, thank you, because I had it in my notes and I missed it. I think it'd be the most fair in going forward if, rather than make something out of whole cloth, which could then be challenged as having deliberately been fabricated to discriminate against aircraft users or something, we have, I believe, in our old zoning code, which is not in effect right now because we're in the interim zoning ordinance, but it's something we adopted 20 years ago, a set of standards for a light manufacturing studio use zone, which I think is very, very close to what the airport is at the moment. So it'd be friendly for me to amend my motion that those leasing guidelines should at least be modeled on the definitions we had for the light manufacturing and studio zone.
That's what you're suggesting. So you're okay with that?
So
That was the Airport Commission recommendation we heard from Chair Goddard, who's nodding his head. That'd be friendly to me as a subsection under what I said about environmental remediation. There's no doubt that with the industrial activity on that side over the years and the sales of fuel and our experience with MTBE and the leakage of fuel tanks, that there's probably a direct environmental issue with fuel sales. And we could figure out ways to limit fuel sales, to mitigate the impacts of fuel sales, even to take control ourselves of the fuel sales. I'm not going to specify that in the motion because what we're doing is we're directing staff to come up with these guidelines. But that interest and concern is friendly and in keeping with the motion.
all right, thank you.
If I may briefly, because what you just said, I just want the community to note, Mayor O'Connor and I do not always agree on development issues, but we absolutely agree on this one. And I think you've heard tonight that some of the people who want to keep the airport plan to scare you into voting against the airport being turned into something better out of fear of development. And I hope you've observed here tonight a commitment, which I hope is shared by all the council members, that the airport is never going to be some high-rise development. When I said that the airport concept plan should focus on low-intensity use, that's exactly what I meant, and I said it very deliberately.